Hey, let's do it for the content. Mega Ran. Let's go. Let's get it. Dick Kick City. It gets gritty when Mega Ran come through. The kid gets busy. Work yourself into a shoot, but you know it's legit. Like what you like, just don't be a dick. Hey, wrestling with regret. Let's get it. Yeah. What's that scent? Maybe you should bottle it. Drink it and spray it on. Get Claude to model it. 8 years in, can't look back. Who else can make velour sweatsuits look whack? Wrestling with regret. Let's get it. Yeah.
In a business built on deception, it's not surprising to learn that some of our heroes in wrestling aren't always what they seem. Scandal and wrestling go together like milk and cookies, but like in all walks of life, the amount that a wrestler is punished for their transgressions is often inversely proportional to how important they are. Whether it's the fact that wrestling exists just below the radar of mainstream culture or wrestling fans are generally more forgiving of their heroes' shortcomings, it does seem the spray tan these guys use is also laced with Teflon. And this week, I'm gonna rank them. My picks for the top 8 wrestlers who've survived scandal. And before you ask, Vince McMahon is not on this list. Not only is he not a wrestler, you could also make an entire list of scandals that Vince himself has survived. Hell, maybe even a 2-parter. So we'll come back to that at some point in the future, eventually. Number 8. Jeff Hardy. Drugs and alcohol have been the downfall of many a wrestler over the decades. Guys like Scott Hall and Jake Roberts come to mind. But their modern contemporary, Jeff Hardy, has an impressive rap sheet all his own. Shortly after his departure from WWE in 2009, Jeff was arrested on drug trafficking charges after police found hundreds of painkillers, steroids, and more drug paraphernalia in his house. The legal battle lasted for 2 years, and while the initial arrest might have been a red flag for some companies, it was apparently a non-factor for total non-stop action.
Look who's in the crowd here at the Impact Zone! Shocked! A night when we promised you surprises! Jeff Hardy in the Impact Zone! Whoa!
TNA welcomed the charismatic enigma back with open arms in January of 2010. At Bound for Glory that October, Hardy turned heel and joined the Immortal faction, becoming the company's world champion in the process. And by March the following year, Impact's live and let live philosophy would come to bite them in the ass. Hardy's downward spiral was immortalized in the main event of Victory Road 2011. Set to face Sting for the title, Jeff vanished in the middle of the show, then came back in no shape to compete. Despite being too fucked up to put on Velcro shoes, much less wrestle a match, he was carted out to the ring anyway, as Eric Bischoff called an audible for the match to end in 90 seconds. Scott and Jake have had their issues, sure, but even at their worst, they were never this messed up on a match of this magnitude on a platform as large as TNA's. Despite that embarrassment, along with a handful of other DUIs in the years since, Jeff's career has largely remained intact. He'd returned to Impact after a stint in rehab and even regained the world title at Bound for Glory 2012. Hardy would go back to WWE in 2017, where he has won several more championships. They have repeatedly brought up his personal demons in storyline, which I guess is a natural consequence of being in a company that has no new ideas. Number 7. Steve Austin. Steve Austin's meteoric rise to fame in the late 90s helped make wrestling cool and exciting again, but all that success was a heavy burden on the Rattlesnake as he grew increasingly paranoid about his job security, turning to drugs and alcohol for refuge. Things reached a boiling point in June of 2002 when he famously walked out of a Raw event after finding out he would lose a King of the Ring tournament match to Brock Lesnar. Though his logic in not wanting to lose to a rookie with zero build was sound, his walkout was highly unprofessional, leading to a company-wide burial of one of their top stars. Not a huge shock considering this is the same company that's bashed other top names who've dared to offend them in some way. The pressure of walking away, combined with his substance abuse, caused his personal life to fall deeper into shambles. Less than a week after leaving Raw, he was arrested and charged with beating his wife Deborah, eventually receiving a year's probation, a fine, and community service. Deborah would later claim in interviews that Steve had beaten her multiple times and that WWE not only knew of the abuse, but also told her to keep quiet about it lest the company suffer financially from one of their top stars being outed as a wife beater. Like I said, Vince McMahon is his own top 16. But any bad feelings toward Austin from both the company and the fans seemed to evaporate in 2003, when Stone Cold finally returned to beat the piss out of Eric Bischoff before having his final match with The Rock at WrestleMania 19. Austin would later be accused of similar acts with his then-girlfriend Tess Broussard in 2004, though no arrests were made and no charges filed. And though Austin has at least publicly attempted to atone for his past sins, it's sort of amazing that his immense charisma and legend have kept the stain of these transgressions, alleged and confirmed, buried beneath the surface. Number 6. Jerry Lawler. After years of being the king of Memphis, Jerry Lawler surprisingly joined the WWF in late 1992. After a few months as commentator, Lawler entered a feud with Bret Hart, attacking the Hitman for daring to aspire to the throne after winning the King of the Ring tournament. But while Lawler was arguably the hottest heel in the Federation, he was still a beloved hero in the Mid-South territory. Fans of all ages loved the King, old and young. But as the song goes, he might have been looking for love in all the wrong places, as Lawler found himself indicted on charges of sodomy and statutory rape of a 15-year-old girl in November of 1993. Lawler claimed that he merely took the teen to the mall where he bought her clothes before they returned to his hotel room. Sounds perfectly normal and innocent. I know plenty of wrestlers who just casually hang out with their younger fans and spend money on them before going somewhere private, away from the prying eyes of the public. Who can forget when John Cena had an entire high school cheerleading squad over for the weekend, or when Hulk Hogan had a slumber party with a busload of Hulkamaniacs? Lawler was immediately pulled from his match at Survivor Series against the Hart family and replaced by Shawn Michaels. By February the following year, the rape charge against Lawler was dropped when the accuser refused to testify, though Jerry would cop a plea for harassing a witness. Again, totally something an innocent person would do. This after Lawler wrote a super classy letter to prosecutors in which he attacked the accuser's credibility, pointing out that, among other things, she had previously slept with a black man. I mean, forget fucking a teenager, that's the real scandal. Incredibly, this was all brushed under the rug, and even to this day, the insinuation of Jerry Lawler's underage sexcapades has done little to harm his career. The King came back to the WWF by WrestleMania 10, eventually evolving into the panting, lust-soaked middle-aged man squealing over puppies every week on TV, and he even ran for public office in Memphis on more than one occasion. Lawler also seems to carry no shame for the alleged incident. Not only would he often joke about liking younger women on commentary, he once retweeted an old news story about the charges back in 2017. Once a king, always a king, I guess. Number 5. Hulk Hogan. When an entire industry is rocked by scandal, it's not uncommon for its biggest star or most public face to suffer the brunt of the backlash, and there is perhaps no bigger star in the history of pro wrestling than Hulk Hogan. It's a testament to the magnitude of his star power that he's been able to survive not one, but 2 major scandals in his career. The first, of course, was the shocking revelation that many wrestlers from the 80s got their cartoonishly chiseled physiques with help from, are you sitting down? Steroids. In a moment that surely made Vince McMahon's heart rate skyrocket and his asshole pucker, Hogan went on the Arsenio Hall show and revealed that he had been on the gas, but only for medical reasons.
At the time, I had to make a decision of going into surgery, have my back, my deltoid, and my bicep cut and reattached with staples, or do the sports therapy route. And that sports therapy involves hours of the ultrasound to get the blood going again, the deep muscle massage, and prescription drugs by my physician that I trusted, legal prescription drugs, basic anti-inflammatories, and a synthetic male hormone, which is a form of a steroid.
After saying the quiet part loud, Hogan left the WWF for about a year. He finally returned in 1993, looking much less of a Hulk than he was in his 80s prime, before leaving wrestling to pursue his dream of being an actor. Hogan would have a career renaissance in the late 90s with the NWO before returning to the Federation in 2002 and being positioned as wrestling's Babe Ruth. That was until 2015 when he sued the news site Gawker for publishing a sex tape of him with the wife of his now former best friend, Bubba the Love Sponge. But as we all know, the sex tape itself wasn't the scandal. In the video, Hogan is heard uttering a racist diatribe, complaining in explicit tones about his daughter Brooke dating a black guy. Wow, do you think he and Jerry Lawler trade notes? WWE immediately unpersoned Hogan when the shiznit hit the fan, removing him as a judge on Tough Enough and wiping out any and all historical references to the Hulkster. Come on guys, isn't that a little harsh? I mean, he said he was only racist to a point. Hogan initially apologized for his comments in a statement to the press, but later added a caveat that he apparently got his honorary N-word card because he grew up around other kids, black and white, who said it all the time. And as we all know, it's fine to never grow up and learn from your mistakes. Knowing the history of Hogan's relationship with Vince McMahon, it was no surprise that Hulk was eventually welcomed back into the fold in 2018. But instead of an outright denouncement of his racist comments, Hogan only told the locker room to watch what they say because cameras are everywhere. Clearly the lesson to be learned from all this. Everything seems to be hunky-dory with Hogan and WWE again these days. The former world champ has made sporadic appearances on TV since the scandal, but got quite possibly his biggest backlash at WrestleMania 37 when the fans booed him while on stage. Or I don't know, maybe it was because that silly pirate getup. You know Hogan, always dropping those hard R's. Number 4. Sid Vicious and Arn Anderson. It was one of the most brutal road fights in wrestling history, and the only thing more surprising than the fact they both survived is that they both had pretty good careers afterward. In 1993, WCW went on a European tour. In typical WCW fashion, the tour was scheduled very poorly. After a long transatlantic flight and a 3-hour drive, the boys wrestled, went back on the bus, and drove another several hours to the next location. The lack of sleep and an abundance of alcohol combined for a violent night in Blackburn, England. According to those who were there, a verbal altercation broke out at the hotel bar between Sid Vicious and Arn Anderson, who was defending the honor of his friend Ric Flair. Cooler heads seemed to prevail when the men went to their hotel rooms, but Sid couldn't let it go and went to Anderson's room, Sid armed with a broken chair leg, Arn with a pair of scissors. Depending on who you talk to, either Sid attacked first or Arn did, and by the end, Sid suffered 3 stab wounds to the face and a big one to the stomach, while Arn was stabbed in the chest and stomach 20 times. So much for once a horseman, always a horseman. Though Arn allegedly began the fight, Sid was the one who suffered for finishing it, as most of the WCW roster refused to work unless Sid was fired immediately, which is exactly what happened. Despite the incident, Sid would become a multiple-time world champion in the WWF and WCW, while Arn has stayed involved in wrestling as a highly regarded wrestler than an agent to this very day. As for their relationship, apparently the two don't hold any ill will toward each other for what happened, and have since buried the hatchet. Number 3. Pat Patterson. Pat Patterson is widely considered to be one of the greatest minds in pro wrestling history. A great worker in his prime, his larger legacy is his years spent as an agent, booker, and executive for the WWF, serving as Vince McMahon's right-hand man for much of that time. But as responsible as Patterson was for the Federation's rise to prominence, he was also allegedly just as much to blame for fostering a culture that almost brought the company to ruin. In the early 1990s, a group of former ring boys and enhancement talent accused company management like Patterson, Terry Garvin, and ring announcer Mel Phillips of sexual misconduct. All 3 were accused of everything from sexual propositions to outright assault and molestation, with many of the victims having been minors. And apparently, many wrestlers would go on to confirm the allegations against Patterson. The WWF settled out of court with Tom Cole, one of the key accusers in the Ring Boy scandal. Former ring announcer Murray Hodgson sued the company for wrongful termination, believing he was fired for turning down a sexual advance from Patterson.
He had come up to me and he said, "So you're the new guy. What do you taste like?" And I was really put back by it. And I told him that he had the wrong guy. And then he told me candidly that not if I wanted to keep my job with him, I didn't. And he kept his word. 2 weeks later, I was fired.
Patterson stepped down from the WWF, as did Garvin and Phillips. Once Hodgson's charges were dropped, Pat was brought back in September of '92, while Garvin and Phillips remained persona non grata for the rest of their lives. Somehow, the stigma of the accusations against Pat faded over time, and many performers who have worked with him, from The Rock to Shawn Michaels to Chris Jericho to Sami Zayn, have touted him as a genius. But for many fans, the allegations have left a dark cloud over Patterson's legacy. Number 2. Carlos Colon and Invader 1. How does one get away with murder, especially the murder of a world-famous professional wrestler? Well, owning your own promotion, literally being an island unto yourself, and a disorganized and possibly corrupt local government is a good start. By the late 80s, Bruiser Brody was looking to get in on the management side of the business after being the one true independent wrestler in the rapidly changing wrestling landscape. He saw Puerto Rico, specifically Carlos Colon's World Wrestling Council, as the most promising prospect for long-term success. Brody made plans to buy company shares not owned by Colon, which put him at odds with Jose Gonzalez, the booker and the company's top local babyface under the gimmick of Invader 1. Brody and Gonzalez had been at odds with each other since the late 1970s, when Brody ate up Gonzalez in the ring, dominating him completely and ruining a prospective push. Add to this Brody's very public declaration that a company with him in charge would not have Gonzalez as the booker, and it was clear that the Invader's world was closing in on him. On July 16, 1988, Gonzalez called Brody into the shower of the locker room to discuss business. An argument ensued, ending with Gonzalez stabbing Brody in the stomach. Brody would die from his wounds, but Gonzalez would claim self-defense. Invader was found not guilty of murder, as jurors bought the image of Brody being a violent madman whose rage could not be controlled. Coincidentally, the American witnesses to Brody's murder, from Tony Atlas to Dutch Mantell, didn't receive their summons to appear in court until weeks after the trial had taken place. From there, Colon and the WWC underwent a campaign to rebrand Invader 1 as a hero, from cutting promos while holding a baby to being portrayed as a victim against other wrestlers who seemed to want to kill him and his friends out of revenge. In the long run, the murder of Bruiser Brody did little to affect the lives of Jose Gonzalez or Carlos Colon. Invader 1 continued to work for WWC for years and reclaimed his position as one of the most beloved wrestlers in the island's history, while Colon would maintain his stronghold in the territory with no challengers. Before I reveal the number 1 entry, here are a few honorable mentions. Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Rob Van Dam. This one proves the old adage that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Or whatever, man. 19 years apart from each other, almost to the day, Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Rob Van Dam were pulled over and caught with marijuana and arrested in the midst of huge pushes. Now, RVD, weed, not a huge shock, but the problem was he was the reigning WWE champion. And in Duggan's case, his bitter rival at the time, the Iron Sheik, was riding shotgun. It's hard to tell whether the marijuana or the breach of kayfabe was the bigger offense back then. While Duggan and RVD were certainly shamed for their transgressions, both managed to recover from their respective setbacks and go on to have legendary careers. Most of the WWE roster in 2007. The repercussions of the Benoit murder-suicide went far beyond the victims. Police found a huge cache of steroids in Benoit's house and followed the paper trail back to Signature Pharmacy, exposing more than a dozen WWE wrestlers who were either currently or recently under contract. This forced the company's hand, and nearly everyone involved was suspended and removed from programming. But for the most part, those who were suspended came back to work with their careers relatively unscathed. Some of them still work for WWE to this day, and others would go on to become Hall of Famers. Jimmy Uso. As the old saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But fool me thrice, a drink will suffice. That's apparently the case for multiple-time tag champion Jimmy Uso, whose family ties in WWE that seem to keep him guarded from the consequences of multiple DUIs over the last several years won't do much if he ends up killing someone because of his irresponsibility. Let's hope it doesn't lead to that. And my pick for the #1 wrestler who survived a scandal is Superfly Jimmy Snuka. A scandal such as this would rock WWE today, but apparently it was a lot easier to cover this sort of thing up in the 80s. Superfly Jimmy Snuka took wrestling by storm in the 70s and 80s with a high-flying style that defied the plodding, bear-hug-heavy WWF of the day. By 1983, Snuka was the most popular wrestler in the Federation and seemed poised for a run at the top. But just as Snuka's star rose, his personal life was unraveling as drugs and an irrational temper took over his life. After a series of prior altercations, on May 10, 1983, Snuka called 911 from his hotel room in Allentown, Pennsylvania to report that his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino, was unconscious and suffering from head trauma. Argentino died shortly after arriving at the hospital, and based on her injuries, authorities suspected foul play. Snuka gave several conflicting stories about what had happened to cause her injuries. For reasons that are still debated to this day, from Vince McMahon allegedly going to the police with a briefcase full of money, to Snuka pretending he couldn't speak English, he was never officially charged in the case, though it did remain open. Snuka's career stalled, but eventually picked back up after the incident, remaining a big name for the Federation until his active career was over, when he would be frequently brought back to play up his legendary status. In 2015, more than 30 years after Argentino's death, the 71-year-old Snuka was finally arrested and charged for her murder, but was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial, as years of head trauma from wrestling had taken its toll on his faculties. Snuka passed away in January of 2017, just days after the judge's ruling. Though all signs point to Snuka being responsible for Nancy's death, justice was never served, Argentino's family never received closure, and the Superfly still got a rose-colored send-off from the very company some say helped to cover up his alleged crime. And that's why Jimmy Snuka is my pick for the #1 wrestler to survive a scandal. Which wrestlers have I missed? Let me know in the comments section below. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.